Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly, too. USA Prepares. We're delighted you're with us. And if you hear some cows mooing today, we've changed the fence, and I've got cows right up. I'm on the first floor now, not the second floor like I had been. And I've got this window, and they look in the window at me, literally, and they're right. I mean, literally, they can rub their necks up against the window and put their nose prints on the window. And so the cows are right outside for their breakfast. Blake is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. Guineith Isaacs is with us live in Australia. Welcome, Guineith.
Vincent, I'm so glad to be with you this morning. I heard you've been fired. Have you been fired?
Well, yes, I have been fired. Now, this is not the first time. This is not the first time I've been fired. When I was in high school, I was really fortunate, and I got a job as a sandwich maker at a independent submarine sandwich shop. And everything was working really well, and I'd work after school and made submarine sandwiches. And one day the boss said to me, the owner said to me, "Hey, do you have any friends that would like a job?" I said, "Well, I have a friend, and he goes to a different school. He goes to the public school in the next town over, but and I was going to this boys' school, this Catholic boys' school." And I said, "I can ask him." And he looks neat and clean. And so the boss said, "Sure." So I mentioned it, and my friend came in for an interview. He got hired. Everything was great. We worked together. Some days we didn't. And a few weeks later, the boss called me over and said, "Hey, Vinny, I'm going to have to let you go." Okay.
That was really rotten of your boss.
Well, here's what happened. Money was missing from the register. And this was one of those, you didn't type in, or it wasn't one of these computerized things. This was back in the 70s. So you just ring up the sale, and there would be a tape. And it would just say how much each sale was, nothing really specific. And so he said, money was missing from the register, and I have to let you go. It's okay. And I was really shocked and stunned. And then I found out a couple weeks later, my friend was fired. Money was missing from the register. So the owner thought I had done it and just fired me. And what really happened was this new guy that my friend had been taking money. Yes. And it wasn't me. But yet I got fired anyway. So that was the first time. The second time I got fired was there was this little clinic in Virginia down the road from us, and it was a health clinic. And they had this big sign on the wall, and it said, if you're late for an appointment, $25 late fee. If you miss an appointment, $25 appointment. If you miss an appointment, don't call, $25 fee. And it was really an insult, I thought, and because of the way it was. It was handwritten on 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and it was just really an attack on the patients. And so I had an appointment, and it was Monday morning, first appointment, and I showed up, and the doctor's office was closed. The clinic was closed. I arrived at my appointment on time, took time off from running my company, and they weren't there. So I sent the doctor a letter telling him that he was being charged by me for $25, which was exactly his policy. So he missed he missed my appointment. Now, his time is no more valuable than my time, okay? We only get so much time on this planet, and we don't get any more. And there are no do-overs, right? You can't redo that time that you missed. So he wasted my time, and I figured, well, I was a CEO of a company, and he was a CEO of his doctor's office, and his time was worth what my time was worth, as well as anybody else's time, whether they were CEOs or not. So I sent him this letter and charged him $25. He responded with a 2-page, 1-paragraph letter. It was just nonstop 1 paragraph. And he fired me. He fired me. So I was the second time. The third time I got fired was yesterday. Mrs. Finelli had a doctor's appointment. She has pneumonia, and she was going in for a follow-up, round number 2 of pneumonia. And I don't know what's going on because I've had a couple rounds of it. She's had, this is her second round. So she was going in for to see how the antibiotic is working. And so at the end of we always go to the doctor's office. The family goes together. Typically, if it's my appointment, our son goes and my wife goes. And, 3 of us go to all the appointments. There's always 3 of us in there. Except for yesterday, it was just my wife and me. Our son was in the waiting room. And so at the end of the appointment for Mrs. Finelli, the nurse said to me, Vincent, I've got something for you. And she handed me this letter. And it's the internist. I go see a wonderful internist. She's a female doctor. Not only is she a female, but she's a female doctor. So she has a practice for females. But for some reason, our 2 sons and I are patients of hers, which is really great. She's a wonderful doctor. I love her. And so they let me know that I have been fired by my pulmonologist. And I said, what? Really? For non-compliance. The term is non-compliance. So I've been fired by not this female internist doctor, but by a pulmonologist who has had me on the operating table a couple times, CAT scans a couple times, a lot of x-rays. And so she fired me for non-compliance. And the letter just starts out, I regret to inform you that I will no longer be able to provide health care to you due to non-compliance with prescribed treatment plan. If you require health care within the next 30 days, I will be available. I will not be available to care for you after May 18th. And it goes on to say, if you want another doctor, go get another doctor is pretty much what it says. So I decided to look up last night. I came home. I'm still kind of stunned that my doctor fired me for non-compliance. Now, class, I don't take direction very well, okay? But that's not what this is about. This particular doctor prescribed that I have a hole drilled in my chest. It's called it's a needle procedure where they use a CAT scan and they drill a hole into your chest and remove part of your lung, and they test it for cancer and whatever else. I did that, and you're out for that. I mean, you're put on
amniocentesis of the lung, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then they had another procedure. They wanted to look down my throat, and they wanted to look into my stomach, so they put a camera down there. I got to tell you, that's no fun. But what's the least amount of fun was the procedure called a bronchoscopy. They strap you down to like a waterboard table, literally. You are strapped down, your arms, your legs, your head. You can't move. The only thing you can do is blink. And I'm not kidding. And sweat. That's all you can do. And they put this tube in your mouth, so you can't open your mouth anymore. You can't close your mouth. And then they stick this camera down your throat into your lung. And I got to tell you, I've been through some pretty awful situations in my life, but nothing compared to having 4 or 5 people stand around you in lead suits, and you're strapped down. You can't move. You can't even grunt. Okay, and then they put this camera down into your lung, and you're partially sedated. But man, it's no fun. How long does it last? 45 minutes. So I did that. Then she wanted me to have a surgeon open my chest and look into my lungs and cut a piece out and see what's going on, and put another camera up there under my ribs, or if they had to take a rib out or break a rib or whatever. And so I went to the surgeon's appointment, and he said, no, we're not doing that. There's no need to do that. So I mentioned to all of my medical practitioners that, and I'm doing some other things, colloidal silver. I'm on carbon 60. I've had some Myers cocktails with Dr. Norman Shealy. I'm on massive doses of vitamin C. And I'm taking colostrum. And that I've mentioned that I have some medical friends like Dr. Norman Shealy, medical doctor, surgeon of the year, Dr. Bill Deagle, medical doctor, and also some other medical practitioners like Stephen Ewer. So I kept them all in the loop. Well, it got me fired. So I went to the internet and I said, can a doctor fire a patient? Well, the answer is yes. And there's an article, it's called verywell.com, and it says, we know for a long time that patients can leave a doctor for a new one. But in recent years, we're hearing more and more about doctors who are dismissing their patients. And patients ask frequently, can my doctor dismiss me? The answer is yes. It is legal and fair, I don't know about fair, for a doctor to fire a patient under any circumstances. There are circumstances where a doctor may not dismiss a patient. And a doctor may not dismiss a patient, for things like, if they have a disease that the doctor doesn't want to contract, you can't just get rid of your patient. But you can fire your patient for non-compliance. And that is when a patient fails to follow the treatment recommendations established by the doctor. Now, I have always discussed every treatment with my medical practitioners, every single one. Let's talk about why we want to do this, and then sometimes I'll say, is that necessary? Let's do another CAT scan. Do we have to do that? Do I need that extra radiation? How about an X-ray? What do you think? Okay, we can do an X-ray. Now, a patient, we'll go more into this when we come back, and then I just want to share this because I think this is very, very important. Guineith Isaac's with us. We'll be right back. So, why may a doctor dismiss or fire a patient? Of course, now we mentioned non-compliance. Another reason is the patient's failure to keep appointments. So, let's say there's a repetitive missing of appointments. So a doctor can say, I can't take this anymore. Or if a patient is rude or obnoxious, okay? It's considered a form of abuse. Non-payment of bills. So if the patient doesn't pay, the doctor can say, you know what, can't do this anymore, you're not paying. If a doctor's practice is closing, that's another reason why a patient can be dismissed from the practice. But there's a new reason, and that is, what kind of insurance does the patient have? In recent years, more and more patients report their doctors are firing them for no apparent reason, or at least they're not told what the reason is. Yes, and here's what it is. And one thing that these patients have in common is that their payers reimburse the providers, meaning the doctors, at low rates. As reimbursements have gone down, the number of patients reporting dismissals from the doctors has gone up. So if you're not sure why your doctor has dismissed you, you might want to find out why, which is what I did yesterday. I walked right over to the doctor's office. I handed him the letter I just received 5 minutes earlier through my internist's office, and I said, I've been fired and I want to talk to someone about why. I want to know why. Because I have not been involved in non-compliance. There's no question about it. I've complied with everything. All right? I ask questions. I'm not a pain in the neck. I don't take more time than anybody else. But I want to know why. Okay? And I'm not saying I debate why. I just, I can understand pretty quickly, believe it or not. So, the reason I think that's going on, and this is why this is so important, this is why I'm discussing it. I'm not whining, class. I'm not whining. As a matter of fact, when my wife heard that I was fired right in the internist's office, she said, great, great. And I ran into another person on the way over to the pulmonologist's office in the lobby there. I said, hey, a friend of ours from town, and I said, I've been fired. She said, congratulations. That's wonderful. She thought it was great that I got fired because evidently she doesn't like this pulmonologist practice either. So anyway, So why do doctors say that patients don't comply? And one of them is called denial of the problem. So many diseases and conditions are easy to ignore, even though they've been diagnosed. And so, for example, diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, people may say, I don't think I have it. So they don't comply with the course of treatment. Another reason is cost. So your medications and therapies may not be covered by insurance, and people flat out can't afford it, so they are prescribed medication. And some of these medications, I don't think the doctors really have any idea how much they cost. I mean, enormous amounts of money. Not all medications are $4 a month, okay? And some of them are very, very high. So the cost of treatment could be a reason why a patient says, yeah, I'd love to comply, but I can't afford it. It's either that or I get kicked out of my apartment. And it's difficult to live on the street. So, they don't comply because they can't afford it. Another one is the difficulty of the regimen. So, for example, some patients may be prescribed a medication in the middle of the night, or they may not be able to open the child-safe container, for the medication. So the difficulty of the regimen may be a reason for non-compliance. Another one is the outcomes or side effects. There may be some physical, unpleasant side effects that the patient says, this is just more than I can bear, and they don't comply. Another is lack of trust. When the patients don't trust the possibilities or buy into the possibilities of the success of the treatment, they may not follow through. Another is apathy. Okay, some people just are apathetic and don't comply because of that. And another is previous experience. So, for example, in my case, I mentioned to the pulmonologist that the bronchoscopy was the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me in my life. Being awake and having it strapped down, not be able to move, say, speak, do anything other than sweat, was really unpleasant. And I would not want to wish that on anybody. I mentioned that. Bad move, right? You don't say that to your doctor. You don't say, man, that was awful. I really wish you cut off the right leg instead of the wrong leg. You don't say that. So you can get fired for those reasons. However, I think the big reason is the vote. I think that when I moved to Medicare just recently, the reimbursements went down. I think that's the reason. So that's what I wanted to share with our class. Gwyneth, I'd love to hear your comments when we come back. So, Gwyneth, yeah, you're right. I was fired. And I thought it was so important to mention this. I wanted to mention it with you on the air because it's the kind of thing where patients have no idea or could have no idea what happened. And it could be because they've been, they've graduated from insurance that they paid for, their employer paid for, or they paid for themselves, like Blue Cross or something like that in the United States, to Medicare, where the doctors are not reimbursed as much. And I think that's really what it is. But I have to find out for sure. But I have to respond to this. I cannot let this go where they said I'm non-compliant, because I'm not. But what are your thoughts, Gwyneth?
Well, it used to be how if you didn't have the money and couldn't afford a treatment, I know this is not in your case, but doctors would treat you for free.
You mean they used to?
They used to have this thing called charity care.
Yeah.
Where if you and it was entirely up to the doctor to determine that. But that's how it was before. And they used to have the doctors taking the Hippocratic Oath, and after taking the Hippocratic Oath, they more or less felt obliged to help people if anybody came to them with medical problems. And they knew that they had enough paying patients, and that they that they would be okay, that they probably wouldn't lose their Mercedes-Benz anytime soon, because there were enough people who actually did pay. And what I think is happening is that because of what we are going to discuss, which is especially in, as I think you call them in the United States, blue city areas, that there's so many poor people that they have to insist on being paid even by the poor, because otherwise they wouldn't get paid. You know, they wouldn't be able to meet their own bills. And the fact that the health insurers have dropped their reimbursement amount really doesn't help them, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that the other thing is that they listen overly much to their accountants, you know, and their accountants say, listen, you've got expenses, yada, 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 yada. You want to be able to keep paying your bills and so on and so forth, you know, and you want to keep that nice house. You want to keep that big car, don't you? Well, if that's the case, you've got to stop accepting these low premium rebates, and you've got to stop letting poor people off from paying their bills.
Yeah.
You know,
and here's the interesting thing.
It used to be a matter of ethics that they would not refuse to treat people just because those people couldn't pay.
Yep.
But
and
apparently that's not how it is now.
I wanted to get a refill on a medication that I absolutely need, and I don't like medicine. I really don't. But this particular antibiotic I needed, and so I called in, and the doctor said, or the office said, they returned the call the same day. They said, well, we can't refill that. We've got to see you. I said, okay. And so my wife was on the phone, and the appointment was in 2 months. So the first available appointment was 2 months to see me, but I needed this medication now. And that's a problem. And so at the same time that it takes 2 months to get a doctor's appointment, the doctor is accepting new patients. So the doctor cannot seem to be able to see the patients that she has, and she's accepting more patients. So I think this all ties into that Mercedes, the boat, that kind of thing. I really do. Now, I can't prove it, and I'm looking forward to sharing with our class exactly what happens when I find out, because I'm going to demand to know exactly why I've been fired. Exactly why. And I'm going to take this to the highest level of the hospital system, because I think that's where it needs to go. I haven't done anything that would cause me to be fired. I haven't done a single thing. I'm proactive. And I said, I even said to the nurse, do you like it or not like it when your patients ask questions and your patients are prepared for the appointment? Which do you prefer? She said, we love it when the patients are prepared. So when I go to a doctor's appointment, I have a spiral-bound notebook with me. I keep a daily log of all the things that I do and the reactions that I have, positive and negative. So they can say, what was your blood pressure at Tuesday at such and such a time? But last month, I can tell them. I can tell them exactly what it was. I can tell them what I took when and what my thoughts are. And so and when I go to a doctor's appointment, I have this spiral-bound notebook, and I write down all of my questions, all of them. So when they say, do you have any questions? I say, yes, I have these 9 questions. And I don't waste their time. I ask them the questions, and I get the answers. And so they say they like it when you are an advocate for your own health care. However, I don't know if that's true. Now, some doctors, I think it's absolutely true. But I don't know if it's true of all doctors. I have a feeling that some doctors don't like it when you do your own research. And you say things like, what are your thoughts on carbon-60? Do you think that that's something what is carbon-60? Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you write down carbon-60 and look it up, and maybe we can talk about it. What do you think about colostrum? Colostrum? What do you think about colloidal or ionic silver? Well, that can turn you blue. Okay. Oh, I've never seen anybody go blue, and I've read about it, but that guy made his own colloidal silver, and he did it wrong. He used saline solution instead of distilled water, and And that's why he turned blue, and he way overdosed himself for a long time, so he turned blue. So I ask questions about that. What do you think about 6,000 units of vitamin C? 6,000 milligrams of vitamin C spread out through the day. What do you think about that? It's a lot of vitamin C. Well, do you think I should change my diet? Well, you get all the nutrition that you need from your food. You don't need supplements. Those are the kinds of things you hear when you ask questions, when you do your own research, like I do. Now, fortunately for me, I have friends. And in class, you have friends, too. Their names are Dr. Norman Shealy, Dr. Sergey Sorin. Dr. Sergey Sorin and Norm Shealy practice together. Sergey Sorin's an emergency room doctor. That's one of the toughest professions I think there is on the planet. I mean, that's life and death all the time. That's a tough, stressful situation. But that's what he does. And he's a friend of ours. He's an instructor here, a senior instructor. Bill Deagle. Stephen Ewer. We have some wonderful, wonderful medical professionals. And then there's John Regan, who does research like crazy. And he's up on a lot of things. So, I mean, there's so many of us that I can't mention all the names, but Guineith Isaacs. I mean, you do a lot of research too, on everything. You want to know about everything. And I'm sure that if you went to the doctors, you would be prepared. Is that right? You'd have your list of questions, wouldn't you?
Yes, I generally do. Although I try and avoid doctors' clinics because here in Australia they seem to have the Mercedes-Benz syndrome as well. I don't have private health insurance. If anything goes really wrong, we'll end up at the emergency department. But once, we had this. I had a child, and my children are pretty active children, and I had this child, and he slipped and fallen, and was having trouble walking on his foot, and so we, and to go to the emergency department for us is not a light thing. It's 80 kilometres, and we don't have a car. Okay, so it's. We'd made quite a trek to go to the emergency department to get this child's foot checked out to make sure that there was nothing wrong. And it wasn't the doctor, it was the nurse. And she, this happened a couple of times. She told us that in her humble opinion there was nothing wrong with our child and she wouldn't let us see a doctor in the emergency department. Because this happened a couple of times that one of my children fell, and sometimes they fall and they twist their ankle. It's a sprained ankle. It hurts like nothing else for a day or two, but it's ultimately just a sprain, and so they get over it. But if it's a break or a dislocation, they've got to have it in a cast, or it's going to affect their growth and development of that foot, right?
Absolutely.
That's how I've always understood it, But we had this situation happen once, and it ended up being a sprain, and so we went home, and he had his foot strapped up. And then, a few months later, it happened again. And so we went back in there, and this nurse says, "Oh, don't I remember you? Aren't you those people who your child had a sprained foot and you ended up in here? And now you're back again with another sore foot?" She said, "I think you need to go and see your GP." And I said, "It could be broken. How do you know?" It needs to be examined. And, if we go to a GP, he's probably going to send us to the hospital for an X-ray anyway. And even a trip to our local GP is still a 20-kilometre trip up the road without a motor vehicle.
Yeah, hold that thought.
It's still fairly...
We'll be right back. Guineith Isaacs is with us. And so I've got a question for the class. Have you ever heard of a broadcaster talking about the things that, or so I should say broadcast, talking about the things that we talk about here, personal things? Who have you ever heard say, hey, I'm being attacked by the state, saying that I owe unpaid taxes and they're putting a lien on my property? Have you ever heard that before? Have you ever heard a person on the air talk about problems with their doctors? And the reason it's not to complain, it's not whining. It's so you know that these things can happen to you, and there are avenues you can pursue. Now, I don't know exactly how this is all going to work out. However, I do know that I have to write a letter to the hospital, to the CEO, and say, here's what's happened. And it's not accurate. So what happens is, just like these police reports can be fabricated, and a case can be built against you, okay? And you can be hauled in front of a judge for whatever reason later on. And then the judge can say, wow, or the prosecutor can say, Your Honor, have you seen what a problem this person is? Holy smokes, this rap sheet's unbelievable. Look at all these things that this person has done according to these police reports. And it can all be fabricated. All of it. And so in my file there's this letter that says I'm non-compliant. Do you think that I can let this drop? Of course not. Because it's damaging. It's damaging to me. And it's not true. That's why we talk about these things. Because this can happen to you. Guineith, what else would you like to talk about today?
Okay. What I would love to speak about is something called socialism. Communism, which absolutely ties into the pathetic nature of our health care. Okay, because what they've done, they've socialized the health care system. Okay, and they've basically said you have only got one place to go for your. This is what they're bringing in. Okay, that you will eventually only have one health insurance provider. And that will be it. And they will more or less get the say on whether you live and die. And you know something? I've lived in two countries, Australia and New Zealand, that they have a public-private system where if you've got money, you can have a private doctor, okay? You can actually pay your private doctor in cash in this country if you have the money, okay? But most people either have health insurance or they go with the public system. So it's not quite the same as in the U.S. But I have, very, very close, beloved relatives whose lives have been shortened dramatically by decades through refusal of doctors to treat them for medical complaints and refusal... just flat-out refusal to treat. And I'm thinking in particular of my dad, and he had gallstones, and this was in New Zealand, and he went to the doctor repeatedly 5 or 6 times complaining of a sore stomach. And the thing is, he was ill for a period of about 2 weeks, and over this 2-week period, he went for about 5 or 6 times to try and seek medical attention. And the doctor basically looked at him, took a bit of a poke at his chest, and because he was had been an engineer for many decades, his chest was like boilerplate. It was just rock solid. Well, to cut a long story short, he died. He died of a ruptured gallbladder because the doctors refused to treat him. And if the doctors had treated him, he would probably still be alive today. Because other than that, he was perfectly fit and healthy. This is a serious, serious issue. So we'll discuss socialism and communism on the other side of the news.
Yeah. Very, very sad. Guineith Isaacs, live in Australia. We'll be right back. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. I just have a couple quick announcements. Number 1, Friday, hour number 1, I'm going to be talking about generators. Just me. Unless someone would like to join us in the discussion. But I'm going to be teaching a class on generators. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. And what you need to know. Propane versus diesel versus gasoline. How long they last. The maintenance on them. How you connect them. How many watts you should. What size generator. Consumption. How much fuel do they consume? That's Friday, hour number 1. Hour number 2, I just got off the phone with Stephen Hewer, and he's going to be joining me in, and I want to talk with him about colostrum. I'm getting colostrum from him, and I feel so much better. It's amazing. And so that's Friday. And let's see. Next thing is, I forget. The telephone listen line is working, and it's working great. And so if you want to write this down, at 605-477-3249, 605-477-3249. Guineith Isaacs is with us, communism and socialism. Guineith.
Yes, communism and socialism. And it's been, we live in a country here where in Australia, the communistic, socialistic mindset has been gradually, working its filthy little fingers into this country now for probably about the last 20 or 30 years. And it's really, really bad, but I want to sort of alert people. By the way, we were going to talk about this a few days ago, right? Alex Jones, because I called you up on the phone and I said, this is what I'd like to talk about. Isn't that right, Vincent?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but Alex Jones, yesterday on his show, went on about a 1-hour rant about socialism and communism and how evil they were. And I was just sitting there going, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I was going to talk about.
Yeah.
To which I say, well, great minds think alike.
Yep.
If you want a really, really good essay on exactly what socialism is and how bad it is and why it's bad and how bad and why communism's bad, go and listen to yesterday's Alex Jones show for about the first hour at least. And he goes into it much better than I ever could. But I'll do my best. Socialism, its whole objective is feeding the wildlife, okay? And the wildlife being you and me. You live in a forest or you live on a farm that is at least part forest and you have wildlife in that forest, right? Would you start feeding the deer in the forest on purpose?
If they're starving, yes. Okay. If we in the coldest part of the winter when there's ice and they can't get to any food at all, yes. Other than that, no.
Yeah, that's right. And just to keep them alive, and that's it, right?
That's exactly right. Now, some people do that to entrap them. I mean, we don't do that. Some hunters will feed them in what they call a food plot, and they bring them into like a gauntlet, and the deer say, well, it's been okay Monday, it's been okay Tuesday, can still eat here, and then the hunters kill them with rifles at a long distance. We don't do that.
Yeah, but that's what the globalist intention is, that when they have their free stuff communism, free stuff socialism, and it could be Obama phone, and it could be, like so-called free health care, and then one day they turn off the spigot and stop treating you after you've forgotten how to look after your own health. I'm talking about this in general, okay? That's their policy in general. Just like the woman at the emergency department turned around, after I had brought my son 80 kilometres into the emergency department to get his foot x-rayed to see if there was a break or if it was just another sprain. for her to turn around and say, "Oh, you're wasting our time. Get out of here. Go and see your GP." I wouldn't even put my name on the list, But the thing is, it's called. We had the state premier here a number of years ago in Australia. He was the state premier of Queensland, and his name was called Joe Bielke Peterson. And later on, he got another name, which was Sir Joe Bielke Peterson. He actually got knighted. And he was actually a friend of my husband's, okay? So, but he wasn't 100% bad, and a lot of Queenslanders really loved him. But he had a saying, and that was, feed the chooks, okay? The chooks stay around because you feed them, and they forget how to look after themselves. And that sums up communism and socialism in a nutshell. It's about feeding the chooks, and you and I being the chooks. What we have to do, and if you live in a country like this, you have to remember how to look after yourself, okay? That means you have to grow at least some medicinal herbs in your garden, ones that are relatively easy and safe to use but highly effective. That will provide emergency medical treatment for a variety of conditions. And an excellent one, I've mentioned this a number of times, but I'm going to mention it again, is comfrey. Comfrey is a medicine box in a plant. It really is. And it will grow happily if you live in a cold climate, or any frosty climate, actually. It will go dormant during the winter because it has a big tuber under the ground. It has a big taproot. It'll grow happily as a house plant, and you can take the leaves anytime you need them, do your own research, find out how to use it. It's not intended to be used internally, okay? But that's an example. You forget how to grow food. They rely on the fact that you don't know how to grow food. They put you on food stamps, and then one day they turn off the food stamps. And that is called, in their words, culling the flock. That's their words. Now, could you imagine feeding your cattle, and, stocking them to rates where it was impossible for the grass to regrow, and then suddenly not feeding them one day? That's unconscionable behavior, right?
Absolutely.
But that's
what's
exactly
happening.
What they do over and over and over and over again to us. And in their own documents, they call us cattle. And that ought to disgust absolutely everybody out there. And the only way to be free of these people, the only people on the whole planet who have ever been free of these evil, evil people, of the likes of Mao Zedong, who killed at least 80 million of his own people over a 30-year time span when he was chairman of the Communist Party in China. 80 million of his own people. And there's been books written by survivors of the Mao regime, and a good one is Wild Swans by Zheng Chang, okay? And fortunately, she was able to make something of a living because her father was a Chinese a Chinese herbal medicine specialist. And he was regarded as being a doctor, and because she had some medical skills that at one time that helped her to survive. But other family members of hers weren't so lucky. And you've got it happening in America to particular people that we all know and that we all love, but I'm not going to say any more than that. But it's happening here in Australia. If they don't like you, they turn the spigot off and they put the screws on you to see if you are going to be able to survive, okay? And if you don't have these sorts of survival skills to know what to do, how to produce your own food, your own medicine, make your own shelter, you are gone. if they decide to put the screws on you, and also how to legally represent yourself in a court of law. If you don't know how to do these sorts of things, and if you are relying on people on the outside, those people on the outside are not always going to be there for you. Because what will happen if people in places of so-called authority decide that they don't like you, they'll call your doctor and they'll intimidate your doctor. I've had this happen to me personally, and try and get your doctor to stop treating you, especially if you have a sickness that you need medical attention for. They'll go through your medical records. They're not supposed to, but they do. And they'll find what's wrong with you, and they'll find a weak point, and then they'll go and they'll attack it. Or if you've had particular problems in your own past, they'll go and they'll find it. They'll go and visit your relatives. I've had the WA police, okay, because I wouldn't allow pedophiles to have my son, go to particular relatives who had particular problems and lean on them, or, you know, another relative was old. They went to my elderly relative, totally intimidating behaviour, because I outed a couple of pedophiles that lived locally and that they were actively protecting them, you know. And every time I say this sort of thing on air, by the way, we get black helicopters, we get drone overpasses, we get all sorts of things interesting and wonderful happen when I go into this.
Hold that thought. Yeah, as I mentioned, I spent some time in Springfield, Missouri with my wife at her doctor's appointment, and on the way home, we decided to stop at Sam's Club to pick up some lubricants for the farm. A few cases of diesel oil and a few cases of automatic transmission fluid for the farm equipment. And, you know, I always check the tires before I get in the vehicle, before we leave, and each time I get in, I, you know, to do a visual inspection to make sure that they're, you know, they're inflated and nothing's happened to them. So in Sam's parking lot, I noticed that, geez, the tire is low on air. So I opened up the trunk, and by the way, they don't have as many air dispensers as they used to. You know, I used to be able to go to a gas station, and they would have an air hose there, and you would just crank up to the pounds per square inch that you'd like, you know, 32, 35, whatever you wanted. You just crank it, unhook the hose, bring it over to your vehicle, and it would inflate it to the pressure that you set on the dispenser, and it was free. Well, now you got to look pretty far to find an air hose, and so this tire was low, and it looked like we got a flat between the doctor's office and Sam's Club, which is just a couple miles. Well, I had this compressor in the back of in the trunk, and I bought an old Porsche years ago, and a Porsche 928, and it was used, and it was very, very inexpensive. I needed a lot of work, so I fixed it up, and with the Porsche came an air compressor you plug into the cigarette lighter with like a 20-foot cord. So I hooked it up, and this woman was parked next to us, looked at it, and this thing's going, it's humming away, and she kind of smiled, and I said, yeah, and so she told me the story. She said, you know, she ran over this bag of stuff in the road. She had a pretty new car, maybe a year or two old, and had great tires on it, and so she said, yeah, I went to change my tire, and it didn't have part of the jack handle. Didn't come with it, or she couldn't find it, didn't know how to use it. And that's exactly what you're talking about with this communism and socialism. So yep. Here we have a woman who was absolutely helpless because she could not put the spare on, even if she knew how, and some passerby stopped to help her who did know how. But he had his own jack. He had what we call a bottle jack. It's a hydraulic jack, and you screw up to extend the height of it, and then you turn the hydraulic valve to lock it in place, and then you put in a lever and you pump it up. And so he had one of those, and he was able to jack it up. But the point of that little story is she was not prepared. Now, in USA Prepares, what we do is we make sure that, well, do you know how to use your tire jack? Do you have the lug wrench? And I don't like the lug wrenches that come with most vehicles, so I have a breaker bar that's 22 inches long, 24 inches long. I have the right socket for it. I've tested it all to make sure it works and it fits. I have a screwdriver to pry off the little hubcap to get to the lug nuts or lug bolts, whatever the case may be, if there are little hubcaps on the vehicles. And everyone in the family knows how to change a tire and has done it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And so, you know, this woman was kind of surprised that we had a little compressor in the car. Well, no sense in leaving it.
You buy them at the Auto Pro shop.
Yeah. Now,
they cost maybe $50.
And Porsche thinks thinks it's so important that you have one of these that they come with the new Porsches, okay, or they did back then. And Mercedes, you had talked about Mercedes toolkits. Well, Mercedes, and I've never bought a new one. I just could not justify it in any way, shape, or form. I couldn't justify the half of the price of a new one. If someone said you could have a new one half price, I still couldn't justify it. If they said, tell you what, 75% off, what do you think? I'd say, sounds nice, but thank you anyway, I can't do it. I only buy them at like 5, 6, 7, 10% of what the new one would cost. That's what I pay for a Mercedes. So, literally, no exaggeration. And Mercedes, they all come with first aid kits. They come with a first aid kit, bandages, and a toolkit, and a plastic sheet so that if you have to work on it, get under it, you can roll out this plastic sheet to protect your
You're not going to mess up your designer clothes.
Yeah, there you go. And in my case, my designer Wranglers. Hey, we'll be right back. Guineith Isaacs is with us. Hey, Guineith, I want to thank you. A couple of weeks ago, you mentioned a book that you recommended reading. And while you were describing this book on the air, I went to the internet and I found a copy, eBay. And the book that you recommended was called The Richest Man in Babylon. And so it's an excellent book.
Everybody's got to read it.
It just arrived.
It's an oldie, but it's a classic.
Yes.
Good, isn't
it? Well, I've only read like the first 20 pages. I couldn't read the whole book yesterday, but last night, very late at night, I picked up the book and I started reading. I got to 20 or 21 pages. That's all, and I paid $11.45 for it, shipping, no tax, and of course that's tax deduction class. And the original purchase price of the book on the jacket says $10.25, and the copyright. I wanted to buy one I wanted a hardcover. You can get it in softcover, and the copyright was 1955. And the first copyright was 1926, 1930, 31, 32, 33, 36, 37, 40, 46, 47, 54, and finally 1955. So I have an older one. It's in magnificent condition. I don't think it was even read. I mean, there are no notes in it, no marks, and I love it. So, The Richest Man in Babylon, and I wanted to say thank you for recommending it. Class, I think you should consider getting it, reading it as Guineith has recommended. So far, I find it quite fascinating.
Yep. I got my copy with some pocket change at a thrift shop.
Great for you. Guineith, where I live, we don't have any thrift shops. If we were on the East Coast, where our country began, that's where the wealth is and was, and you could get, a lot of these wonderful items used for very low cost. But out here, it's not the case.
Yep.
People don't read out here. They just don't read. Let me say that a different way. They don't read. It's unbelievable. So I think they're doomed to doing it the hard way, because I read a lot. And all of our instructors read a lot.
Yeah. I read a lot. I have a job where I'm a telephonist. I have to sit near the telephone when I'm on shift. And basically, I have to either sit and twiddle my thumbs or do some craft work or go on the internet or read.
Right.
And twiddling my thumbs generally loses because I can't stand sitting in one place doing absolutely nothing for any length of time. So usually I end up either going on the internet and finding information that I need to find, or watching, I might watch stupid cat videos and stupid dog videos for 10 or 15 minutes, but then I think this is ridiculous. I'm going to go and actually study something. So I'll pull up some YouTube videos about a useful topic,
Yes.
and that I feel that I need to know about. And that might be permaculture. It might be, depending on what's happening in my life, how other people are sorting out particular legal situations. It might be something to do with Bitcoin. It might be something to do with livestock management. I love watching Cesar Millan's videos. I'm a dog handler. I love my dogs. And my dogs, if they can be trusted off lead, they generally live free range. If they can be trusted not to go and make trouble anywhere. And I think that I might have gotten them to the point now where they can all live, except for the greyhound. She will always have to be yarded. But to where all of them either live in a very, very large yard or completely free range on the property. And we have 20 acres of land, so it's not like we live in the suburbs. But, it's these sorts of things. And Cesar Millan has been a fantastic resource for me. I was always reasonably good at dog handling, but he's just improved my dog handling no end. But you've got to have that degree of independence of mind to be able to figure things out, to go and find resources. And this is what communists are not counting on you doing, okay? They want to control the press. They want to control book publishing. They want to control the internet. They want to control radio. They want to control television. Because if they can control these things, they can control your mind. And if they can control your mind, they've got you. They have absolutely squarely got you, like that deer eating that hay in the middle of the clearing. And these New World Order evil people are like that farmer with his 22 scope sitting in his hide looking down at the deer clearing, just waiting for the right one to show up. That is absolutely what they're like. They're totally predatory. They're not your friend, okay? And, if you're in a situation where you must take some government assistance or you're going to starve, what you have to do is use that government assistance to set up your life to the point where you don't need the government assistance anymore, okay? And, ostensibly the reason why things like single parents' pensions and this sort of thing are there are so that single parents are going to be looked after. And I've been on the single parents' pension. I'm a widow. My husband died when my younger boy was 3 months old. Okay, I had to go on the single parents' pension for years, but I used that to help me to obtain real estate. And that was my first farm of 10 acres, not the farm that I'm on at the moment. But then, I was able to later on sell that farm at a profit, okay? And that's how I used my single parents' pension. And I didn't get a bank mortgage. I got a private mortgage, and, the Social Security system, I've told them the rule that, of how that mortgage was set up. I didn't have mortgage repayments, but I had to pay rent to the mortgagor, the mortgagee. I had to pay rent to the people who gave me the mortgage instead of paying mortgage repayments. But then I paid off the mortgage when I sold the land, and that enabled me to buy my next property and then this property and pay cash for it. Now, that's a way of using a government assistance or a government payment to set yourself up. You've got to be smart about this and not go all through your life thinking that the government will always be there to help and the government's going to be your friend, because they're not going to be your friend. They're not there to help you. And you've got to think of ways that you can, if you must take their assistance, of how you can use that assistance to set yourself up so that you won't need the assistance into the future. Here's an example. I think privately you once said to me, "Hey, Guineith, you ought to move to the Ozark Mountains."
I did, because I would love to have you as our neighbor. Absolutely.
Well, you know something? I think that I will stay here in Australia for the moment. But if anybody else wants to move to the Ozark Mountains, okay, there's a YouTube channel, and it's called Instant Acres. Okay, all one word. And these people who run this YouTube channel, they run it as a promotion for their business, and they have a rent-to-buy program that they've set up. And they are currently offering particular blocks of land in the Ozark Mountains for $500 down. And it's a rent-to-buy system where you pay rental for a certain number of years, or vendor's terms. I think it's either rent-to-buy or vendor's terms. And you can... no, I'm not paid by them. I just noticed their YouTube channel, and I like looking at real estate. I love real estate. And I like to keep an eye on what's happening on the market. And I was tempted, because some of these farms, they're run down, but they're beautiful. My gosh, you live in a corner of heaven where you are. The Ozarks is just lovely. And some of these pieces of land that they had for sale, I don't know if they're still for sale, some of them have springs and everything on them. You know, rivers running alongside them, and the countryside looks that lush and that green. If there's anybody in the United States who's preparedness-minded, you know, they might want to look into that. You don't have to have a bunch of money to get a rent-to-buy mortgage. And as long as you are absolutely 100% diligent in paying it, and as long as you get good lawyers on your side when you set it up, it can be a way. It's high risk, and this is not financial advice. You've got to go and do your own homework. But I've bought land before a couple of times on vendors' terms and rent-to-buy programs, and I have actually ended up being the proprietor of that real estate, okay? It can be done. And that might be, if there is somebody in that part of the country who's thinking, how can I possibly do that? How can I get land of my own? Then that's a possible way that you can do it. But you will be roughing it. You will have to have some sort of off-grid system from the get-go. But, you know, I would certainly encourage people to get out of the city and learn some of these survival-type skills now. And don't rely on the government. The government's not your friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Guineith got some great advice. I've got a quick comment when we come back on exactly what we did with our farm here in the Ozarks. We'll be right back. So, Guineith, you're talking about the Ozark Mountains, and I have a couple of quick comments. A little over 13 years ago, Mrs. Finelli and I were looking to move from Virginia to a place that we'd like to spend the rest of our lives in. And so we found this farm, and it had been neglected for 20 years. It had an old home site, but the home had burned down. And there was a well there. But that location on the farm was about 3/4 of a mile from where we wanted to build our house. So the farm had some barns, has a stream that runs through it, about 1/3 of a mile through it, and it was really rough. It had saplings because it was neglected for 20 years or so. Some of the pastures had saplings that were, I don't know, 8 feet tall. Just trees just showed up, and they were turning the pastures into woods. So that wasn't acceptable for us because we wanted to raise cows. So we did a lot of work, 13 years worth of work. And now when I look at the farm, I go, wow, it's really, really nice compared to what it was. And so we ended up buying this farm, and it was the right decision. And it's in the Ozarks, as you mentioned. Another quick story is years ago, back in the 1980s, probably 35 years ago or so, I wanted to buy a building or a property. And I talked to the owner, and the owner had an asking price, and we agreed on a lower price. And I said, okay, I'd like to buy it. It needs plumbing and heating systems. I'm interested, but you'll have to lend me the money, all but 10%. I've got 10% of it, and if you'll lend me the rest, we'll buy it. And so the bank interest rate at the time was 8 or 9%, and we agreed that he wasn't a bank, and that he was willing to accept 5.25%. So he was able to sell it. We paid him what we thought it was worth. We paid him a loan rate for the mortgage note that was acceptable to us. He was glad to get it because he couldn't get 5.25% at the bank anyway. So it was a win-win. So the whole reason I'm telling you this, class, is you can buy a property without having a bank involved. You can say, I'd like to buy it, but you'll have to lend me the money to the seller. And it can work. Or you can do what Guineith says. It said you can pay on it and have those payments go toward principal reduction. You can. There's an old saying, first you're born, then you die. Everything else in between is negotiable, right?
Yep. That's right. And that includes with the government too.
Yes.
Because ultimately they're a corporation. And they cannot do anything to you without your consent. And if you don't consent to what they're doing, you need to express that non-consent, and you need to say, UCC, what is it, 1301, that you reserve all rights. And they have to keep by it because it's their law. And you need to say, listen, all rights reserved, without prejudice, I don't consent to contract with you. And if you do that, they can rant, they can rave, and they can, jump up and down, and they can try to make life difficult for you. But if you hold your ground, you can ultimately say, listen, you are aware that this is just creating a problem for you into the future, because in the future I'm going to sue you, and because I don't consent to contract with you, and you're attempting to force me to contract with you, and that's called extortion. And ultimately, they can rant, they can rave, they can jump upside down if they want to, but if you don't consent to contract with them, you don't consent to contract with them. And, I think that's the end of the show, isn't it, Vincent?
Yeah, it is. Guineith, I've got to tell you, I said this to you off the air, and I want to make sure it's clear. I just love broadcasting with you. You are just a wonderful person. I'd love to have you as a neighbor. So when the cryptos come in, please consider having a...
Maybe I will. Maybe I will buy land in America, in the Ozarks.
Wouldn't that be nice? I'd love it. Our family would love it. So anyway, Guineith, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge base with us and volunteering your time. I know the class really appreciates it.
Yeah. God bless and have a great week.
God bless you too.